So starting off today, we're going to start off with a legend in marketing for storytelling and creativity in a post-pandemic world. I'd like to introduce Professor Jerry Wind, Lauder Professor Emeritus at the Wharton School, also Marketing Hall of Fame. Please welcome Jerry.
Thank you, Nick.
All right, Jerry. All right. Let's get into it. I think we have just like to be expected. We're going to put the audience to work right away, I think. So let's jump right in, shall we?
Absolutely. We can turn the presentation on. I think we can start.
All right. We got it here.
I don't see it yet.
Okay, we're just going to get to the slide. Here we go. All right.
So let's start with self-assessment. How compelling and engaging is your story in achieving your vision and objectives in the post-pandemic era? So if you can, each of you try to score yourself as from not compelling at all, a 1 to extremely compelling 10. And let's proceed with the next question. How effective do you believe is your creative marketing and business strategies for the post-pandemic era? And again, rate yourself from 1, not creative at all, then effective, to 10, extremely creative and effective. And if we can turn to the next page, please. So when you've done it, in addressing the effectiveness of your storytelling and creativity, have you considered the new reality that we face that reflects the fact that we have been actually quite successful over the last 18 months in addressing the pandemic and related crisis? Just think the work from home, the online learning, the e-commerce, the telemarketing and telemedicine. Think about Zoom and other platforms we've been using. Think about all the activities that you have done in the last 18 months. And the question is, to what extent the current strategies that you have, the storytelling and marketing and business strategies, reflect the lessons that you have learned from this period? The answer to the evaluation of the 2 questions was no. Then you really should think about adjusting your initial assessment and rethink your strategy. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So this session is really for you to try to improve your score on the 2 dimensions that we kind of started with, the creativity and the storytelling. So if we can turn to the next page, please.
And for anyone just following along here, this is probably the easiest question that Jerry has ever asked in his years as a professor with the various universities and Wharton especially. So take this as a layup and just know that this session is for you, no matter where you are in the industry. If you're a chief marketing officer, if you're an assistant brand manager, if you're a freelance designer, if you're thinking about marketing and you're a student or you're a professor, it really is, the book has not been written yet on what our future is in this next new normal. And so that's what today is about, just making sure we're all on the same page and thinking about the things to frame us as we move forward.
So we're going to propose here primarily 4 guidelines for you to try to make sure that you can leverage the experience we had in the last 18 months and move forward in enhancing your storytelling effectiveness and your creativity. So the first guideline is to challenge your current mental model. And that's important. If you remember, the title for this whole program, the whole day, was Reset, Reboot, and Reopen. That's great. That's the right thing to do. But I would like to suggest you add 3 other R's to this. Rethink, reimagine, reinvent what you're doing. Because the reality is that you cannot just go back to the world before the pandemic. You know, there is an index that was developed by CNN and Moody's Analytics that's called Back to Normal Index. And I think it sends the wrong message and the wrong mental model, because it basically says, let's just go back to the world the way it was before pandemic. That's not going to happen. We're facing a new reality. You know, to ignore the success we had in addressing the work from home, the online learning, the Zoom communication, even selling by Zoom, is absolutely crazy. You have to realize we're facing a new reality, and you have to change your mental models. You cannot just go back to the status quo that was before the pandemic. And therefore, I think this is the most fundamental mental model that you have to kind of endorse. Don't start thinking in terms of how do we just go back to the way it was before, but think, how do we prepare and move forward in the new reality we face? The book we just published on transformation in times of crisis, the foundation that we're proposing 8 principles to deal with the transformation. And the fundamental one that everything is based on is this one single principle. You have to challenge your current mental model, whatever it is, and you have to start thinking, what will be the right mental model for the new reality that we face? So hopefully you can start rethinking your mental model.
I think a great way to think about it is what we've already done. If you think about back in April, May, June 2020, we just did it. You didn't have a choice, whether you were in an agency or you're working with a brand or any business and any walk of life, whether you're in a restaurant, working in a restaurant or a hospital, you just did what you needed to do to drive growth, drive your business forward, and do the right thing by your brand's purpose, and tell your story. And so that's essentially it. You've done already, we've all done in many cases, what we're proposing here. Now it's back to, okay, how do we actually take what we all did, the actions that we took back then, because we had no choice, and make them the new way of doing business?
Great point. So let's turn to the second guideline. And the second guideline really focuses on the question of, does your marketing and business strategies and resulting story reflect the changing consumer dynamics? And what I mean by this, think about the consumer today, think about how empowered they are, think about how skeptical they are, think about the complex consumer journey that they're going through, with over 80% of people, you know, kind of relying on Zoom, or relying on search in any one of their activities, which was reflected in the ZMAT study that Google has done. And the consumer journey is becoming more and more complex, and we have to understand it. Or think about the results of the McKinsey study that did continuously global studies on consumer sentiment, and found out that most people around the world are fearful, concerned about uncertainty. And very important for marketing is the fact that they're all rethinking what they're currently doing. Why are they doing what they're doing? So think also about the changing marketing trends. You know, you think about the move toward omni-channel, the need for real-time personalized experiences. Think about the fact that digital and mobile are first. And we're not talking only about the smartphone, we're talking about wearables, we're talking about implants that will change dramatically the reality, because you're no longer dealing with just an individual. Your target is becoming now the individual and their smartphone or other ways of communicating with the world. And then think about the advances in science and technology. Think about the enormous advances in neuroscience and our understanding of the brain. Advances in AI, advances in cloud, in all the enormous technologies of AR, VR, mixed reality. And then things about the lessons from the successful way of dealing with the pandemic and related crisis, the item we mentioned, the work from home, the e-learning, the e-commerce, the telemedicine, and the like. So when you think about these dramatic changes, to what extent your current strategy, your current storytelling, your current approach for creativity really reflect these type of changes?
And the important thing here, Jerry, is these changes are already here. They are with us right now. The metaverse has been such a thing that's out in the future. That's available as a headset for any 12-year-old or 50-year-old to go out and get it at a store. So the future is here right now. Are we actually taking advantage of how to reimagine what we're doing within that future versus just fit what we've always been doing into what works now?
Great point. So with this, since we talked about primarily storytelling, let's share the results of the study we published 2 years ago on the future of advertising under the book is titled Beyond Advertising, that suggests that any type of message or any type of offering has to be effective. It has to reflect the RAVE's criteria. And by this, we mean it has to be relevant and respectful. It has to be actionable. It has to be valuable. And valuable, we talk about both cognitively and most importantly, emotionally, because emotion trumps cognitive any day. And then the other aspect of valuable in terms of the monetary value of the offering. The E stands for exceptional experience, which relates back to what I discussed before in terms of one of the trends today, which is the desire for real-time customized experience. And finally, and most critical, is a shareable story. Not only that we can turn all our messages into an effective story, compelling story, but we're so compelling that people would like to share it with others. And the message has to be delivered through all touch points, which is really critical because the range of touch points increases exponentially. And we have to make sure that our message is consistent across all these touch points. And the fourth criteria is really the recommendation that you start using a variety of tools and approaches can enhance creativity. So I'm developing now a course for Coursera on creativity, and we highlight there those 10 different tools. Let me go very briefly through them, and hopefully in a few months, the course will be available on Coursera, and you'll be able to learn more about them and how to use them. But primarily what you have to do is the first is what we discussed, the challenging of your mental models. 2 is morphological analysis to structure the problem in a way that allow you to generate a lot of new options for it. Analogies and benchmarking is critical. Interdisciplinary perspective is key, and it's important that whatever team you put together to address your challenges, they represent different perspectives, different disciplines, different ways of looking at the problem. And if we can continue the next slide, and primarily use variety of rules. There are all type of rules that have been established over the years. I will not go now all of them, but just think about, for example, which stands for substitute, I'm sorry, there was kind of a slight technical problem here. So scamper stands for the substitute to combine, adapt or augment or adjust, modify or magnify, put to other use, eliminate, remove, rearrange. So a variety of ways of taking what you're currently doing and changing them, modifying them. There are other ways.
There, Jerry, real quick. It's these seem complicated, but like I said, you have to think back to April, May, June, and even since then, what you've done is more or less a lot, if not all, of these rules and frameworks in one way or another. Now it's about, okay, how do we actually put these together in a structure like we have here to help you move forward and actually plan for this to be your new way of working?
Great point. And we can turn then to the next page because they can look later on at the specific rules. But other approaches, like insights from consumer behavior and cultural trends, absolutely critical. We discussed before a few of them, but continue monitoring the changes. Or start thinking about the absolutely critical way of coming up with more creative storytelling or marketing strategies, which ways for experimentation. There is no substitute for continuous experimentation. Every one of the lead companies that we all admire, Google, Amazon, all the others, they're doing thousands of experiments every day. To what extent are you really experimenting with your different strategies and trying to come up with bold experiments? This is the only way in which you can really understand the causal link between what you're doing and the results you're getting. And start developing.
And one of the leading brands, Jerry, on the iterations and experimentation, one of them said, okay, we have a batting average of being successful 2 out of 10 times. And so what we focus on is not trying to then turn that average into 4 or 5 out of 10 times. We simply say, okay, we're going to do 20, 30, 40 experiments to up our game here. It really expands the level of innovation and obviously increases your chances of having something that you can then really scale.
Great example, but keep in mind that the big high-tech companies are doing thousands of experiments a day. Yeah. Everything they do is a result of experiments. And
yeah, but I think importantly though, anyone can do this. Again, whether you're a freelance designer or an assistant vice president, a media planner, an account director at an agency, you can do this in your daily work. It doesn't have to be, the next big idea. It's really about just putting yourself in a frame of mind where you are experimenting and trying on an ongoing basis. And most importantly here, obviously learning.
A great point. And actually, if you take nothing else from our session, if you start designing few experiments to try to challenge your current mental model and address the kind of new reality, I think, you got your money worth from this session. The 8th area is really the importance of continuously developing curiosity and imagination. 9 is persistence. If you think about advances in science, most of the scientific discoveries that we all admire today, all a result of scientists having amazing persistence, failing one experiment after another until they kind of finally come up with the right solution. And the most important thing is have the courage to experiment, have the courage to try to do new things. Unfortunately, the temptation of the status quo is too strong. And what you have to do is you have to have the courage to change, to courage to experiment with new initiatives.
And I think, again, back to the example of what we all just did. It didn't take courage. It used to take courage. It didn't take courage during the height of the pandemic. And really since then, we've just been doing what needs to be done and taking the risks that needed to be taken, following your instinct in a way that everyone is all in. And so you're doing it for the right reasons. Courage isn't even necessarily required anymore. However, we can't forget that as we move into this next phase. So
here are the four approaches we suggested, the 4 guidelines. Look at the 4 of them together. And the idea will be to start, if you are actually going to implement them and develop some experiments along this line, we believe that you'll be able to be much more successful in coming up with more compelling, engaging stories and a much more creative strategy in everything you do, every aspect of marketing, and not only marketing by itself as a silo, but marketing-driven business strategy leading to the collaboration with the other functions of the firm that have to deliver the value and the experience and the excitement and the engagement to the consumer. So do you want to move to the next step? So the next step we would like you to do, guys, is to design an experiment that you would like to conduct that could enhance your creativity and the effectiveness of your story. So take any of the elements that we discussed, any of the 4 kind of guidelines we suggested, select a specific area and design an experiment, 1 or more, And when you leave this day of learning, actually go and start implementing it. Don't just nod your head and say, yeah, it's interesting. Ask yourself the question, how can I actually design and implement a specific experiment that will enhance my story and my creativity?
And the word experiment does not have to be intimidating. If you're a student, if you're a chief marketing officer, or anything in between, it's try something different and set up a path to how you're going to learn from whatever that is, and do it and just keep doing it on an ongoing basis. And that's really the gist of it. I said in the beginning, Jerry's going to put Professor Wynn is going to put us right to work. Didn't disappoint. And we've got, if you were doing what we all agreed to do, you're taking the time today to not just learn, but also really think about how you can apply these learnings to your organization, to yourself, whether it's just in your own daily life and getting ahead of your career, or your next big experiment for your business. Either way, it's about just doing something differently and learning from it. So Jerry, I think we have time for I think we have time for one question I'm just going to throw at you. What's an example that you've seen of an experiment that was able to reimagine and really kind of take advantage of the framework that you've laid out here?
Well, I think that a lot of what companies have done, and I think it goes back to a point that you made before, a lot of the companies that adjusted almost on the fly in terms of how they, how do you deal with the new reality? And it all boils down to the courage and the leadership. And I'll give you examples. And I'll take it from a different area that you typically don't think about. Think about the art world, think about museums. The Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia, had the right digital infrastructure and the absolutely courageous and wonderful leadership. And almost immediately, once the pandemic started, they started having daily programs to engage audiences, not only locally, but around the world, because now there were digital audiences. And they succeeded in increasing their audience, global audience for the Barnes Foundation, and even increased contribution to it. In contrast, another museum, not too far from there, had basically, the leadership was frozen. They took them over 6 months to start creating some initial communication with their audiences. The lost audiences, the missed opportunities of connecting globally with global audiences, and changing the rule that museums don't have to appeal only to the people around them, but can actually appeal globally, because not everything has to be in the museum. You can create digital offering. So
not only did they just survive, they thrived and created a new marketplace for themselves. Amazing.
Exactly.
Well, Professor Wynn, thank you so much. Thank you so much for everything today and really helping us kick off the live programming in this Global Day of Learning. Thank you so much, and thank you, everyone.
Thanks for having me.